Hey everyone, and welcome back to another edition of the Oregonians Pac-12 Basketball Roundup. Danny Moran over here, Tyson Alger right here. We cover Oregon and Oregon State men's basketball. We're kind of hitting the final stretch of the season. 4 games left for, I think, every team in the conference.
A couple of teams with 3 games, but pretty much everyone's down the final 2 weeks, yeah.
And so the Ducks and Beavers are coming off of the Civil War, which was a game that, as we mentioned earlier, was not nearly as close as the score indicated.
Right.
But essentially, you have Oregon and Arizona sitting on top right now. Utah's right at their heels, and that's pretty much the separation in the field at this point.
Pretty much, yeah. It was a week, just in the Pac-12 where the top teams really kind of elevated themselves, particularly Utah, as you mentioned, getting 2 wins on the road at the LA schools. Oregon obviously bouncing back from their tough weekend at the Bay, and then Arizona just decimating Arizona State.
Yeah, Arizona looks good right now.
They look pretty good, and as does Utah, as does Oregon. I'd
Yeah.
say, as you mentioned at the top, those 3 teams are really the favorites. Cal, still in the mix, had a good win at Washington, who's now fighting to get in,
Right.
which kind of will be interesting to see this week because Washington on Wednesday will play at Oregon State at Gill Coliseum. Both those teams are, depending on which bracket you follow, either on the bubble, just outside the tournament field, so that'll be a huge game. Could be a deciding game either way for either team, and then Washington will go to Oregon, who will be trying to fight for that Pac-12 title.
Right. Kind of as we were mentioning there, it's down to those 3 or 4 teams for the race, but
Right.
it's pretty much. I don't really see Arizona struggling much the whole rest of the year. So Oregon's kind of got to hold serve over these coming weeks, and Washington State is one of those games that you would expect them to have a pretty easy one with, and I think that Washington one will be easy because that's a team that has played really good at times this year, but it's just kind of lost a little bit of the magic here over the second half of the season.
Yeah, it'll be the big game this week. In addition to the games we kind of talked about, Arizona will play at Utah, so that'll be an interesting one on Saturday.
That's gonna be a good game.
And I think that's what we'll play to Oregon's advantage going forward. Is that they'll be at home this week against 2 teams they should in theory beat.
Right.
Then we'll play at the LA schools to close out the regular season. But I think they can get a split there, given kind of what other teams' schedules are doing. They should be. It's still in good position, but I mean, you got to think at this point that the ultimate separation will be by a game or less.
Oh yeah. No, there's not going to be a team that all of a sudden runs away with like a 3-game lead here,
Right.
Unless Oregon starts tanking and Arizona just kind of runs away with like the final 2 weeks of the schedule. But let's look back just briefly at the Civil War. Obviously, we don't need to recap the whole thing, but just going forward this week, what's kind of the biggest thing the Beavers need to take away from that loss?
Fouling. That's the big issue. Opponents of Oregon State have shot 77 free throws the past 2 games, and it's Cal and that's Oregon, so 2 of the more athletic teams in the conference. But now Washington comes to town, and we talked about them and how well they've played at different points this year. I mean, the one thing they do consistently is play fast.
Right.
And
They can score.
And Andrew Andrews, who's Player of the Year candidate from Portland. We've talked about him a few times this year. He may be out of that race right now, but he gets to the line more effectively than anybody in the conference. So for particularly Oregon State's guards, Gary Payton II, Malcolm DeVivier, they each got 2 early fouls, and that changed the momentum of the Civil War. Soon they were down 20 and just couldn't recover. And so Wednesday's you said after the Civil War that was the biggest game of Oregon season to kind of keep up with the Pac-12. I mean, this is now, every game's like that for Oregon State now, but this one particularly because they have no room for error at home. And Washington's a team that, as we talked about, is playing for something just like that because their spot in the tournament's not guaranteed despite how well they played earlier in the year.
And for Oregon's standpoint, I think coming back and winning that game, which was a team that they're better than. The Ducks should have won that. And so I think that was kind of a positive turnaround from like that Stanford game where you just saw kind of a complete letdown against a inferior opponent. So, there's 4 games left on the schedule and Oregon should be favored in all those games. So it's just kind of one of those situations where you really liked seeing the Ducks getting out to that hot start in that first half of that game against Oregon State and just kind of being able to take that the rest of the way. Because every game they've lost has been they start slow and just kind of get slogged down before halftime. And the Ducks have been making their free throws incredibly better than they had at the start of the season. I forget what the numbers were from last game, but it was around 80% or so. So they're doing that well. They're not getting in near as much foul trouble Dylan Brooks has been a little technical foul prone lately, but other than that, if you're an Oregon fan, there was a lot to like from this Oregon State game.
Yeah, Tyler Dorsey got going.
Yeah. Actually, that was definitely a big thing because he had been struggling over the last probably 2 months, and I think everyone was just kind of waiting for him to snap out of it because, I mean, if you want to just go completely based on talent, he might be Oregon's most talented player. He's not the most refined yet because he's still young, but he's been really good, and Dylan Brooks continues to be good. And as you and I were talking about earlier, we kind of think this Pac-12 player of the year race is down to Jacob Pertl from Utah and maybe Brooks at Oregon.
Yeah, Pertl's been incredible. I mean, he got his 4th Player of the Week in the conference award this past week. As we mentioned, Utah got the 2 big wins down in LA. Brooks is still in there. He's got some, I'd say, more talent around him, which may work against him.
Well, and Pertl is just so remarkably consistent too. Yeah. Brooks has the potential to go off for like 31 one game, and then maybe he'll have a 10-point game, which I mean, in this conference, 10 points is nothing to shake your head at. But it's just he can be very elite and he can be very good.
Yeah, when Pertl gets the ball one-on-one down low, there's really nobody in the conference that's been able to stop him. I mean, I think he only took 5 shots against the Ducks when they played last time, but made 4.
Yeah.
So it's really just a question of can he get in position to score, and when he does, he's been pretty awesome this year.
And right now he's averaging about a point more than Brooks is a game, and I think he has about 3 rebounds on him too. So I mean, the stats are there. So
and shooting a really high percentage and does things defensively too. But
I think it could come down to whichever of those teams kind of keeps their status of being in the top 1, 2, or 3 positions here over the final weeks.
And Brooks has a good argument, in the sense that when they last played, he had his game of the season.
Yep.
And although he's had a few of those types of games where Pertl had not one of his better games, even though he was technically efficient. So I'd say those two. It may be decided, like you said, by who wins the conference.
All right, so we got Washington State this week. We'll be back next week before the LA trips. Until then, you can find all our work on OregonLive.com/Ducks and /Beavers. We're on Twitter at Tyson Alger, at Danny J. Moran.
Games Wednesday and Sunday for both teams.
Wednesday and Sunday.
Yep.
Giddy up.